Welcome. Today, we're digging deep into a topic that's, well, it's fundamental to understanding India itself, its massive and absolutely vital agricultural world. We're going to go from the ground up, exploring the systems that feed over 1 billion people. So, how are we going to tackle this huge topic? Simple. We'll start with the sheer scale of Indian farming. Then we'll jump into the 3 main ways people cultivate the land. After that, we'll look at the rhythms of the seasons, check out the nation's major crops, and finally, we'll dive into the ongoing efforts to reform the whole system. You know, to really get a feel for India, you've got to start with the land. So first things first, let's try to grasp just how central farming is to the country's identity and its economy. Okay, let's kick things off with a number that is just staggering. 2/3. 2 out of every 3 people in India are involved in agriculture. Just think about that. This isn't just an industry. For a huge majority of people, it is a fundamental way of life. And its importance goes way, way beyond the farm gate. I mean, obviously, it produces most of the food the nation eats, but it also supplies the raw materials that fuel other key industries, like cotton for all those textiles. And on top of that, it's a major source of exports that connect India to the world. Think of those iconic products like tea, coffee, and spices. So, with this massive workforce, how do people actually farm the land? Well, it happens through 3 very distinct systems, and they really run the gamut from ancient, age-old traditions to totally modern commercial operations. To get a feel for the first and maybe the most traditional type of farming, let's meet Rinja. Her family in Assam uses a method that's been around for ages, a practice that really connects them directly to the natural cycles of the land. So this kind of farming is about as basic as it gets. It's all done on small patches of land using really simple tools and just family labor. Forget about modern fertilizers or anything like that. It relies completely on the monsoon for water and the natural fertility of the soil itself, which gets replenished by, moving to a new patch of land every few years. What's really interesting is that this one ancient practice goes by so many different local names. It just shows you how widespread and deeply rooted this tradition is. So for example, up in the Northeast, they call it juming. In Madhya Pradesh, it's biwar. And down in Andhra Pradesh, it's podu. You can really think of these farming methods as existing on a spectrum. On one end, you have primitive subsistence, which is all about survival for the family. On the complete opposite end is commercial farming. We're talking modern inputs, huge scale, and one main goal, selling for a profit. And then somewhere in the middle, especially where population pressure is high, you get intensive subsistence. That's where farmers use a ton of inputs like irrigation to squeeze every last bit of output from a pretty small plot of land. And there's a special kind of commercial farming called a plantation. Picture these huge estates growing just a single crop, like tea, coffee, or rubber. This is really where agriculture and industry meet. It takes massive investment, a lot of labor, and a really strong link to the markets. Now, all of these farming activities are governed by something even more powerful than tools or markets, the country's distinct seasonal rhythms. So let's take a look at how the calendar itself shapes the harvest. Okay, so India's agricultural calendar is basically broken down into 3 seasons. First, you've got Kharif, which lines up with the big summer monsoon. This is absolutely crucial for crops that need a lot of water, like rice and cotton. Then, the Rabi season kicks off in the winter for crops that like it cooler and drier. Think wheat and peas. And squeezed in between, there's a short, hot season called Zaid, which is perfect for fast-growing stuff like watermelon and cucumbers. All right, so we've covered the how and the when. Now, let's get to the what. Time for a quick tour of India's most important crops. First and foremost, you have to talk about rice. It is the staple food for the majority of people in India, and on the world stage, India is the 2nd largest producer of rice, right after China. It's absolutely essential. And it makes perfect sense that rice is a classic Kharif crop. It just thrives on the heat and water that the summer monsoon delivers. It needs those high temperatures, high humidity, and tons of rainfall to flourish, which makes the monsoon season its perfect growing environment. Okay, next up is wheat. This is the country's second most important cereal grain, and it's the main food for people living in the northern and northwestern parts of the country. And here's where you really see the country's agricultural diversity in action. Totally unlike rice, wheat is a rabi crop, planted in the winter. It actually needs a cool growing season and then bright sunshine to ripen, and it gets by with a lot less rain. It's a perfect example of how two staple foods are grown in two completely different climates within the same country. All right, let's talk about another really important food group. Can you name those coarse grains that are known for being total nutritional powerhouses, packed with things like iron and calcium? Yep, we're talking about millets. When you look at the global picture, India's standing is pretty impressive. It's the world's largest producer and consumer of pulses, a really key source of protein. And beyond that, it's consistently the #2 producer of major commodities like tea, sugarcane, and cotton. This isn't just a list. It shows you that India is a true agricultural giant on the world stage. And for our final section, let's look at how India has worked over the decades to reform and modernize this ancient but absolutely vital sector. The way reforms have been approached has really evolved. Right after independence, the big focus was on land reform, trying to redistribute land more fairly. Then, the 60s and 70s brought huge technological boosts, with the Green Revolution for high-yield seeds and the White Revolution for milk production. More recently, the focus has shifted more towards financial support, with things like the Kisan credit card for loans and the minimum support price, which guarantees farmers a baseline price for their crops. You know, one of the most unique chapters in this whole land reform story was something called the Bhudan movement. Led by Vinoba Bhave, it was this massive social experiment. He literally walked across the country, persuading wealthy landowners to voluntarily gift some of their land to poor, landless families. Because of its peaceful approach, it actually became known as the Bloodless Revolution. So, what's the big challenge driving all these reforms? Well, it really comes down to this. India has been farming the same land for thousands of years. But with a rapidly growing population, there's immense pressure to produce more and more, and to do it sustainably. And that means you need constant technological and institutional support for farmers to meet that demand. And that really brings us to the core question for the future, doesn't it? India's agriculture is this incredible, complex mix of ancient traditions and modern ambitions. How it manages to balance those two things to nourish its people and its economy, well, that's what will define its path forward. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.